And I'm going to read the paragraph just prior to your quote to put it in context. Patsy, who is naturally right-handed, was asked if she can write with her left hand. Quote, "Can I write with my left hand?" she said, pondering the question. A smile crossed her face, and she replied, quote, "I can, but not very well," unquote. Did you make that statement to the Inquirer?
It sounds like something I might have said, yes.
Okay. Is it substantively correct that you can write with your left hand, though not very well?
Well, I am not left-handed.
No, I understand.
If push came to shove, I could probably write something if I'd broken my right arm, but I am not in the manner of writing with my left hand all the time now.
Have you ever told anybody at any time that you were ambidextrous?
No.
That's all with respect to that. Thank you.
I got nightmares in my head, I fear thoughts build up until I can't hear. My mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, I fear the thoughts build up until I can't hear. That my mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. Well, you heard Patsy deny unambiguously during the Wolf versus Ramsey deposition that was in December 2001 that she's not ambidextrous. The article you heard the lawyer citing, and the lawyer was Darnay Hoffman, was a National Enquirer article published in 2000. The Inquirer found at least two people in the fabric of Patsy's backstory who went on the record to say she was ambidextrous. So was she or wasn't she? Who is telling the truth?
Just have to make up your own damn mind to either accept what I'm going to tell you or reject.
But on this simple question rests quite a lot. If Patsy's telling the truth about her ambidexterity in the sense that she says she isn't, then perhaps we must look elsewhere for the author of the ransom note. But if she isn't telling the truth, then we have to ask why. Also, if she is ambidextrous, why not just say so? In this analysis, we're going to look at who the two individuals were who said what they said, and we're going to decide, like the grand jury had to, whether we should believe them or whether we should believe Patsy. And then we also need to ask, does the ambidextrous thing really matter in this case? I mean, if you boil this entire case down to a handwritten note, you say the John Benet Ramsey case sort of boils down to a 2.5-page note that must have been written by someone connected to the events. John Benet Ramsey, handwritten note. And the handwritten note is the key to solving it. And then despite this almost orgy of evidence, 2.5 pages known as the War and Peace of ransom notes. Despite all of this evidence, there's this ongoing difficulty to match the handwriting to anyone. With that, you have this matter of one potential writer of it being ambidextrous, and it was only being openly talked about 3 and 4 years later. Is that significant? What do you think? Do you think it is? Before we get to that, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. By the way, I want to thank Cotton Star for sending me the video clip you heard at the beginning. Mr. Thornwaite, thank you. If you're enjoying this episode, please like, share, leave a comment. You can also hit the thanks button, and let's get started. Now, I want to start off by showing you the official entry form into a pageant that Patsy Ramsey wrote 8 days prior to the incident. And I suppose you could say Patsy probably wrote this with her right hand. But the important thing to note here is the size of the handwriting, the shape of the handwriting, right? To some extent, the spacing. And then in a basic way, does that look similar to the writing on the ransom note? Now we're going to deal with a transcript from Court TV dated October 25th, 2000. And this television broadcast basically followed kind of a breaking news blockbuster expose that appeared in the National Enquirer. And so I'm going to really just read the transcript to you guys. Jane Wallace, she's the reporter. She says, a new report in the National Enquirer claims the normally right-handed Patsy Ramsey is in reality ambidextrous and may have used her left hand to write that ransom note. Investigators have remained suspicious that while the ransom note didn't exactly match Patsy Ramsey's writing, it came pretty close. Here you see the Enquirer's comparison of the note next to a pageant application the Enquirer says was written 8 days before. And that's really important. Handwriting can change just as we change, and so they somehow found this entry form, and probably the entry form came from whichever pageant Patsy sent it to. It's possible, I guess, that they got this form from inside the house or perhaps the house in Michigan, but I suspect this was written by Patsy and given to another individual, and that is why they had a sample that was so current. And so if you want to test handwriting, and that is the problem with Gary Oliva, it doesn't really help the fact that he starts writing letters in 2016. And so if you put me as an investigator onto Gary Oliva, in terms of this question of handwriting, my number one question would be, when was this written? And we know all his writing from jail was since 2016, so 20 years after what happened to John Bonet. And then the second question I would say is, well, do you have any samples of Gary Oliva's handwriting from 1996? And I think then you would have quite a simple situation. Anyway, let's go back to the transcript. Ted Widmer joins us to talk about it. He's the director and principal instructor of the International School of Handwriting Sciences in San Francisco, and I mentioned him in the previous video. He's also the author of Crime and Penmanship. In Los Angeles, Mike Walker, senior editor of the National Enquirer, also the host of the syndicated entertainment show National Enquirer Uncovered. And in studio, Robert Tarver, a criminal defense attorney extraordinaire. Welcome all three. Thank you. I wonder if it's possible to actually get this video clip from Court TV. Anyway, so Wallace, the host, addresses Walker, the editor, and says, it's your story, you're on first. Could it possibly be this simple after all this time? Great question. Walker responds, the editor responds, well, for a long time investigators have known that the note was probably written by someone who's ambidextrous. This is the Colorado Bureau of Investigation, but police have never been able to absolutely independently confirm that Patsy Ramsey was ambidextrous. So we decided, because this case is so old and we're trying to constantly to uncover new evidence, bear in mind this is at the 4-year point, we went to witnesses everywhere, in Boulder, in Parkersburg, West Virginia, and we talked to, the host interrupts you and says, where she grew up. Walker responds, where she grew up, where Patsy grew up. We talked to people from her school days, teachers, etc. We found a witness, a high school teacher who taught Patsy in the 1970s, who said very simply and matter-of-factly, she is ambidextrous. She was as a child. She is now. We went to Linda Hoffman Pugh, the housekeeper, and when we asked her this, she said, oh yeah, she said, Patsy told me she was ambidextrous. I've seen her brush her hair with her left hand. I've seen her paint with her left hand. I once saw her work on a science project with Burke, John Bonet's brother, where she wrote numbers and letters with her left hand. She is absolutely ambidextrous. This is very exciting evidence. As I'm sure Mr. Widmer, the handwriting expert, will tell you, if you look at the letter, the ransom note, the 2.5-page ransom note, you can see indications that this was written by a person who was using their non-dominant hand, the shaky handwriting. Wallace, the host, then interrupts and says, okay, let's take a peek. Mr. Widmer, if you would go along with us here, take a look at what is similar and what is not similar here, because my concern is that after all these years, the notoriety of the crime, the unsolved status of the crime, that at this point in time, you could get anybody, or you could get somebody to say, Patsy Ramsey is the ghost of Christmas past. I mean, you could find someone who just say just about anything along the line. So you tell me, how do you tell when something is written by and then I think she's going to say ambidextrous person. She says, someone who can write with both hands. Come on, how does anybody know that? Widmer then responds, well, actually, I'm not sure that you can say that it's possible to tell somebody who's ambidextrous from at least a single sample of the handwriting. It's also very difficult to say if somebody's either left-handed or right-handed who actually wrote the note. I think the main thing here is that this ransom note was written by a person who is trying to disguise their handwriting. A very interesting point. This ransom note was written by a person, in his opinion, who is trying to disguise their handwriting. Now, I think there are two ways of looking at that. Was someone, even with the hand they were using, trying to change their writing? Or was by merely the fact that you're writing with another hand, are you trying to disguise your handwriting, or is it both? The host then says, not to mention the language in it. Come on. What type of criminal ever writes Mr. Ramsey, listen carefully, exclamation point. Widmer says, I agree. Actually, I have some thoughts on the fact of how it was written, the words that were written, and so forth, because it's very difficult to believe a mother could actually write those words, even though I always felt that the note was dictated, though I can't tell you exactly why. It's more of a feeling from the 40 years I've been doing document examination. So if we pause there and we say, maybe he's right, that it is difficult to believe that Patsy, or if just any mother who is emotional and hysterical, would know what to write. Well, isn't the way around that somebody else did know what to say and it was dictated, and that person was then using the fact that Patsy was ambidextrous? So anyway, Widmer says, I got the feeling that the note was not actually spontaneously written, but probably dictated by someone else. And I think technically it was dictated by a bunch of movie quotes, but the question still remains, who came up with the content of the ransom note? And again, you can imagine that Patsy was very emotional and very distraught, and so that is a very good point. Wallace goes on to say, okay, but maybe written by Patsy Ramsey, are you buying this or not? I'm not sure what you think. Widmer says, well, I think the important thing to understand is that you definitely cannot rule out Patsy Ramsey as a possible writer of the note. Wallace says, okay. Walker says, well, we hired the same handwriting expert that the FBI uses, and that expert said that Patsy Ramsey wrote the note. That's the editor speaking, the editor of the National Enquirer. He goes on to say, the investigators at Chetubowski, who's the chief investigator for the California Bureau of Investigation, I think he means Colorado, was quoted in the recent book by the investigator who quit the case, saying, I believe she wrote the note. I'm not going to take it further than that, except to point out that John Douglas, the ex-FBI profiler who John Ramsey hired to investigate the case, he also said that he just couldn't believe that someone like Patsy could write a note knowing what had happened to her child. And so I think that adds another element to this whole analysis. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.